The injury that broke my life did not come from a stranger. It came from my own family, sharp and silent like a knife in the dark. My name is Alaric Whitcomb, and this is my story. Before you go any further, if you have ever been hurt by people you sacrificed for, please subscribe, like, and comment below. You are not alone. I grew up believing family was everything. My parents taught us that blood was thicker than water, and loyalty was sacred. I took those words seriously, more seriously than anyone else in the house. While my siblings chased dreams, I carried responsibility. I worked, saved, and planned while they leaned on me. By my late 20s, I had become the family's backbone. School fees, wedding costs, rent, emergencies, I paid them all. I told myself I was building something bigger than myself. I believed love would protect me. I was wrong. The day everything fell apart did not begin with shouting. It began with calm voices and polite smiles. A meeting was called. I thought it was to thank me. Instead, it became the moment my name was torn apart. I walked into that room as a brother. I walked out as a stranger. That was the day my blood turned against me, and the day God began a work I did not yet understand. I was not born the oldest, but I became the responsible one early. My siblings, Bramwell, Eloan, and Caspian, looked to me whenever life became hard. I never complained. I only adjusted my dreams. I wanted to study architecture abroad. Instead, I stayed back so Bramwell could finish medical school. Eloan's wedding came before my own future. Caspian's business failure became my burden. Every time I told myself, this is what family does. They called me dependable. They praised my generosity in public. In private, they assumed I would always say yes. As my business grew, so did their needs. The more I gave, the less they asked politely. Gratitude slowly turned into expectation. Still, I kept going. I believed my sacrifice was planting seeds. But something changed when success became visible. When I bought my first house, their smiles tightened. When my name was mentioned with respect outside the family, their jokes became sharp. I noticed the silence when I entered rooms. I didn't know it then, but jealousy had already found a seat at the table. Success does not always bring celebration. Sometimes, it reveals what people have been hiding. When my business crossed its first major milestone, congratulations came late, or not at all. Bramwell stopped calling unless he needed money. Eloan began correcting me in front of others. Caspian joked about my luck, as if I had not earned a thing. I tried to ignore it. I told myself I was imagining things. But whispers followed me. I heard my name spoken softly, then suddenly stop. Stories reached me, small ones at first, that I had changed, that money had made me proud, that I thought I was better than the family. None of it was true. The hardest part was this. The lies sounded believable because they came from people who knew my life. I still kept giving. I thought generosity would fix what jealousy had broken. I did not realize I was feeding resentment. That was my mistake. Lies rarely arrive loudly. They do not crash through doors or announce themselves with fury. They slip in gently, like suggestions you almost agree with before realizing what you've accepted. They wear the soft face of concern and borrow the language of love. It began subtly. Eloan spoke to relatives with a furrowed brow and a lowered voice, saying she was worried about my attitude. Not accusing, just worried. Bramwell followed with careful hints, suggesting I had a habit of controlling people with money, as though generosity were a leash rather than a gift. Caspian, ever smooth, told others I reminded everyone too often of what I had done for them, framing gratitude as arrogance. I was stunned. Not because the words were sharp, but because they were so calmly delivered. These were not shouted lies. They were reasonable, measured, almost thoughtful. And that made them believable. I had never learned the art of defending myself. I believed truth carried its own weight, that integrity did not need an escort. I stayed silent, trusting that time would correct the misunderstanding. Instead, my silence was translated into confirmation. What I thought was dignity became, in their retelling, evidence of guilt. The shift was slow but unmistakable. Extended families stopped dropping by. Phone calls shortened, then disappeared altogether. Invitations quietly dried up. Even at church, familiar faces began to look at me through a lens I did not recognize. Polite, distant, cautious. Nothing had changed in my actions. I was still paying bills. Still showing up. Still carrying responsibilities that were never shared. Yet something precious was slipping away. They weren't taking my money. They were taking my name. The message was brief and carefully worded, "Let's talk as a family." Nothing about it sounded threatening. If anything, it felt hopeful, like an invitation to clarity, to healing, to being heard. I went believing the air would be cleared, that misunderstandings would finally be named and undone. I arrived with an open heart. I left with pieces of it missing. They were already seated when I walked in, arranged neatly across from me, their faces set and unmoving. It felt less like a conversation and more like a hearing. I barely had time to sit before the words began to fall. Measured, rehearsed, relentless. They spoke of control, of pride, of manipulation. Each accusation landed as though it had been waiting for this moment to be released. Everything I had sacrificed was dragged into the light and reshaped into something ugly. Paying bills became leverage. Stepping in became interference. Caring became dominance. Nothing was remembered as love. Everything was repackaged as strategy. I waited for the pause that never came, the moment someone would turn to me and ask, "Is this true?" No one did. My silence was not permission, yet they treated it as confession. Every attempt to speak felt unwelcome, like an interruption rather than a response. As the meeting pressed on, something heavy settled in my chest. I realized this wasn't about misunderstanding or hurt feelings that needed mending. The narrative had already been written. Roles assigned. Verdicts reached. By the time the conversation ended, I finally understood the truth I had been avoiding. This was not confusion. This was coordination. This was a plan. And I had walked into it unarmed, already judged, already displaced, already standing on the outside of a family I no longer recognized. The change was no longer subtle. It followed me openly now. Extended family members who once greeted me warmly suddenly looked past me as if I were invisible. Some offered tight smiles that never reached their eyes. Others turned away altogether. At church, seats beside me stayed empty. Conversations stopped when I approached. I felt the weight of eyes on my back, measuring, judging. Then the stories reached my ears. I heard that I was controlling, that I used money to dominate people, that my generosity came with hidden strings. One person said I thrived on reminding others of their dependence on me. Another claimed I enjoyed playing savior. Each version sounded more distorted than the last, yet they carried the same voice, the same rhythm, as if rehearsed. What broke me wasn't the lies themselves. It was their consistency. These weren't misunderstandings traveling randomly. They were coordinated, carefully planted, repeated with precision. That was when the truth finally settled in my spirit. They had planned this together. The meeting had not been the beginning. It had been the unveiling. I realized then that my name was being dismantled piece by piece, not by strangers, but by those who knew exactly how to wound me. They shared glances. They shared language. They shared silence when I wasn't there to defend myself. I stood alone in the middle of a reputation I no longer recognized, watching years of integrity unravel in weeks. And still, I said nothing. Not because I agreed, but because I finally understood the depth of what I was facing. This was not gossip. It was execution. Slow, communal, and intentional. And my innocence offered no protection at all. The house had once felt like proof that love could be tangible. I had paid for it brick by brick, bill by bill, sacrifice by sacrifice. It was meant to be shelter, stability, a place where family could grow without fear. I never imagined it would become the stage for my removal. They said it calmly, almost kindly. The house, they claimed, belonged to the family. My name on the payments meant little compared to their rewritten narrative. I was told it would be best if I left quietly. No arguments, no scenes. Shame, they warned, would follow me if I resisted. I listened in disbelief as my contribution was erased in real time. There was no discussion, no acknowledgement, just an expectation of surrender. I realized then that fighting would only feed the story they had already prepared. So I packed a single bag, clothes, a few personal items, and my Bible, the one thing no one could reinterpret or confiscate. When I walked out, no one followed me. No one stopped me. The door closed softly behind me, sealing years of labor inside a house that no longer wanted my presence. I stepped into uncertainty carrying almost nothing, yet something inside me remained strangely intact. They had taken the walls, the roof, and the proof of my work, but not my faith. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I could not stay where truth had been evicted. I expected anger to rise in me. It didn't. Instead, a deep quiet settled over my spirit. I made a decision that surprised even me. I would not fight back. I would not issue statements, correct rumors, or chase explanations. I stopped trying to defend a version of myself that no one wanted to hear. Silence became my shelter. I withdrew from arguments that were never meant to be resolved. I let conversations die instead of resurrecting them with proof and pain. I stopped explaining my intentions, my sacrifices, my heart. Every word felt wasted in an environment already hostile to truth. But my quiet unsettled them. Without resistance, they grew bolder. The stories expanded. The accusations sharpened. My absence became their canvas. Where I once held space, they now filled it freely, with assumptions, distortions, and imagined motives. I watched from a distance as my silence was mistaken for defeat. They believed I had nothing left to say because I had nothing left to stand on. They didn't know that restraint was not weakness, it was survival. In the quiet, I learned who I was without applause, without validation, without a seat at the table. I learned that defending myself had never been my calling. Enduring was. I was being stripped, but not destroyed. Misunderstood, but still anchored. And though my silence gave them confidence, it gave me clarity. Sometimes the safest place is not where you are heard, but where you refuse to be rewritten. I prayed the way you pray when words feel thin, not with eloquence, but with fatigue. I asked God questions I had never dared to ask before. Why did doing good end like this? Why did obedience feel so expensive? Why did justice move so slowly? Heaven felt quiet, not absent, but unhurried. The kind of silence that tests whether faith depends on immediate reassurance. I wondered if I had misunderstood everything, if kindness had been a mistake, if sacrifice had been foolishness disguised as virtue. There were nights I stared at the ceiling, Bible open beside me, waiting for comfort that didn't arrive on schedule. I searched Scripture for urgency, for proof that God saw what had been done to me. Still, I kept praying. Not because it felt rewarding, but because stopping felt dangerous. Prayer became less about answers and more about refusal. Refusal to let bitterness teach me how to speak. Refusal to let disappointment redefine God's character. I prayed through doubt, through hunger, through embarrassment, through loneliness. And slowly, something shifted, not around me but within me. I realized God's silence was not abandonment. It was restraint. He was teaching me to trust His timing more than my pain. I didn't feel rescued, but I felt accompanied. And for the first time, I understood that faith is not proven when God speaks loudly, but when you keep listening anyway. Life grew smaller, tighter. I took jobs I never imagined needing. Temporary work. Quiet work. Work that didn't care about my past sacrifices or former stability. Some nights I slept on borrowed couches, careful not to take up too much space. Grateful, but aware of my fragility. Hunger humbled me. Not just for food, but for certainty. For dignity. For rest. I learned to stretch little things. Meals, money, mercy. I learned how quickly comfort can vanish, and how slowly character is built. Yet something unexpected stayed with me. Peace. Not the loud kind. Not the triumphant kind. But a steady, grounding calm that refused to leave, even when my pockets were empty. I was poor, but not panicked. Broken, but not bitter. Reduced, but not ashamed. I began to see that the ground beneath me, though hard, was honest. No false loyalty. No hidden agendas. Just God, my breath, and the next right step. They had taken much from me, but not my center. And as I slept on unfamiliar floors and rose to uncertain mornings, I understood something sacred. Loss had stripped me of everything that could be taken, and revealed everything that could not. The news reaches me in fragments, carried by voices that hesitate before speaking. I hear they are enjoying what I left behind. My former house now shared freely, my cars passed around like trophies. My name, once spoken with respect, is used as a warning. Don't end up like them, they say, as if my collapse were entertainment with a lesson attached. Their joy is loud, almost festive. They laugh easily now. They feel justified. They tell the story of my fall with confidence, polishing it until it sounds like wisdom. In their version, my absence proves their righteousness. My loss validates their choices. Yet beneath the noise, I sense something hollow. Celebration built on ruin cannot sustain itself. It needs constant retelling, constant applause. And even from afar, I can tell they are still talking about me, because joy that is real does not need an enemy to survive. I listen quietly, unmoved. What they call victory feels strangely empty. Opportunity does not come with fanfare. It arrives in the form of a stranger who watches before speaking, who notices consistency where others once assumed manipulation. They offer me work, not out of pity, but respect. I accept carefully. It is modest, honest, clean. I give it everything I have, not because anyone is watching, but because integrity has become my language. Each task, no matter how small, is done fully. No one from my family knows. There are no announcements, no explanations. This door opens quietly, as if God Himself is guarding it from unnecessary eyes. I grow where no one is applauding, where progress is measured not by recognition but by consistency. There are no crowds watching, no voices cheering me on. Just quiet rooms, early mornings, and long hours of learning. I acquire new skills patiently, knowing mastery is built in repetition, not announcement. I listen more than I speak now. Once, I felt the need to explain myself, to be understood immediately. In the shadows, I learn the strength of restraint. I observe people closely, their patterns, their motives, their integrity under pressure. When I do speak, my words are deliberate, free of urgency or defense. Leadership takes on a different shape here. I do not command. I clarify. I do not control. I create space for others to function well. Slowly, something rare begins to form: trust. Not trust forced by position, and not fear disguised as respect, but confidence grown over time. People rely on me because I am consistent, not impressive. There is no noise around my rebuilding, no announcements, no dramatic reversals. Just steady progress, almost unremarkable to anyone passing by. Yet in this quiet, God is doing precise work, aligning my character with my calling, strengthening foundations that will not crack underweight. I realize that what grows in the shadows is protected. It is not rushed, not compared, not distorted by opinion. It is shaped only by truth and time. What grows here is real. And for the first time, I am not afraid of being unseen. Eventually, my name surfaces again. Not loudly, not publicly, but enough. Someone from my family hears that I am doing well, that my life did not collapse the way they predicted. Curiosity turns into concern, and concern becomes interference. Old lies are retrieved like familiar tools. Accusations once abandoned are dusted off and sent ahead of me, hoping to arrive before I do. They assume time has softened the truth. They believe silence still means vulnerability. But the lies do not land. The environment has changed. The people around me are not impressed by rumors. They are anchored in results. They ask for evidence, not emotion. And for the first time, I do not feel the need to respond. The truth stands on its own now, unguarded, unafraid, uninterested in debate. I watch the attempt fail quietly. No confrontation, no drama, just the slow realization that the weapons that once worked no longer have power. The narrative they controlled has expired. I understand then that growth changes gravity. Lies need instability to survive. They require confusion, insecurity, and silence filled with fear. None of those live here anymore. My past knocks, but it is not invited in, and I do not chase it down the road. Promotion arrives without negotiation. I do not campaign for it. I do not announce my availability. I am simply called forward and entrusted with more. More responsibility, more complexity, more consequence. I am placed over systems, not people, yet. Processes, structures, decisions that affect many lives indirectly. I see the wisdom in this immediately. God is teaching me scale without ego, authority without entitlement. Every decision demands clarity. Every adjustment requires foresight. I learned that leadership is less about presence and more about impact, how things function when you are not in the room. There is a quiet honor in this trust. Not flashy but weighty. I feel the seriousness of stewardship settle into me. These systems will outlast moods and personalities. They require integrity to sustain them. I recognize that God is restoring me carefully, deliberately. He is not rushing me back into visibility. He is teaching me how to carry influence without losing myself to it. Leadership, I now understand, does not begin with power. It begins with stewardship, and I am finally ready to bear it. Power changes people, or it reveals them. When authority settles into my hands, the memories rise with it. I remember cold rooms, unanswered calls, the weight of being erased while still breathing. I remember walking away with a single bag and a Bible, unsure if obedience had been naive. Now I have influence, access, the quiet ability to decide outcomes. I pause often, asking myself what kind of man this season will expose. It would be easy, almost natural, to let old wounds guide my choices. To rehearse their names in my mind and imagine justice shaped like humiliation. But every time bitterness tries to root itself, I feel a resistance within me. I realize something important. Revenge promises relief, but it never delivers peace. So I make a decision, not once but daily. I will not govern from pain. I will not let yesterday's cruelty tutor today's authority. Mercy does not mean forgetting what happened. It means refusing to let it poison what I am becoming. I lead firmly. I lead fairly. And in the quiet of my heart, I release them from the role of villains who still control my emotions. Forgiveness, I learn, is not reconciliation, it is freedom. I carry power now, but it does not carry me. And bitterness no longer gets a vote. Trouble does not arrive all at once. It creeps in. Cracks appear where confidence once stood. I hear that my siblings are struggling. Financial strain tightening around them, legal complications unfolding, alliances dissolving under pressure. The stability they mocked me for building begins to crumble. Ironically, the same mouths that once accused me of control now cry out for rescue. They reach for help with the urgency of those who never imagined they would need it. Old networks fail them. Familiar doors close. Panic replaces certainty. I feel no satisfaction, only a quiet soberness. This is not punishment I orchestrated. It is consequence unfolding on its own timeline. They do not connect their shaking world to the foundation they destroyed. Instead, they search for someone, anyone, to stabilize them again. And in their desperation, they unknowingly move closer to me. I watch from a distance, aware that God does not rush judgment. He allows truth to mature. The fall they celebrated has ended. The reckoning they avoided has begun. It is an ordinary day. Paperwork, meetings, routine decisions. Then a file is placed before me, thick, detailed, marked urgent. I open it casually, expecting nothing more than another case. The names stop me. Familiar, intimate, unmistakable. My family. For a moment, the room feels smaller. I read carefully, line by line. Financial discrepancies. Legal exposure. Contradictions that trace back years. Their own records tell the story they once twisted about me. No emotion crosses my face. Inside, something settles instead of explodes. This is not coincidence. This is alignment. I realize the weight of the moment, not because of power but because of proximity. God has not placed them in my hands for vengeance, but for truth to finally stand without my intervention. The file waits. History waits. And so do I. They are ushered into the room tense, exhausted, desperate. They speak quickly, explaining circumstances, minimizing responsibility, framing themselves as victims of unfortunate events. I listen without interruption. They do not look at me closely. Time, hardship, and my quiet rebuilding have changed me. Authority sits differently on my shoulders now. They search my face for sympathy, not recognition. They have no idea who holds the pen. As they talk, I hear echoes of the past. Half-truths polished for survival, confidence built on omission. Once these tactics crushed me. Now, they collapse under their own weight. I remain calm, neutral, professional. There is power in being unseen by those who once thought they knew you completely. The room grows quiet as documents are placed on the table. Pages slide forward, bank records, timelines, signed statements. Facts line up calmly, without emotion, without accusation. One contradiction exposes another. One lie collapses under the weight of the next. The story they rehearsed for years cannot survive paper and ink. I remain silent. I do not interrupt. I do not explain. I do not point out how familiar this feels. How I once stood accused with no evidence, only voices. Now evidence speaks, and voices falter. They stumble over details, correct themselves too quickly, glance at one another for support that no longer comes. Truth does not rush. It does not shout. It simply stands there, undeniable. As the room absorbs what is unfolding, I feel no triumph, only relief. Not because I am finally vindicated aloud, but because I never had to plead my case. God has carried it all this time, waiting for the moment it could walk in on its own feet. The realization dawns slowly on them. This outcome did not require my defense. Their downfall required only exposure. And exposure has arrived. I sign where required. Procedures move forward. Justice advances cleanly, without commentary. As they are led out, confusion clouds their faces. Something feels wrong to them, unfinished, but they cannot name it. They still do not know who I am. And I understand now. Silence was never my weakness. It was the space God reserved for truth to enter fully formed. Justice unfolds methodically. Authorities do not bend. They do not negotiate with excuses. The process is fair, thorough, and complete. Consequences are assigned not out of anger, but accuracy. Every decision is backed by records, not relationships. I watch quietly as the system works the way I once prayed it would. It is only near the end, too late to change anything, that recognition flickers across their faces. A second look. A pause. A narrowing of the eyes. The pieces begin to align. The voice they dismissed. The silence they mocked. The absence they celebrated. They finally realize who I am. Shock drains the color from their faces. Regret arrives, clumsy and late. I see the moment they understand that God has spoken without my voice, defended me without my argument, and restored order without my intervention. There are no apologies offered then, only the weight of awareness. And awareness, when it comes too late, is its own judgment. I do not address them. I do not explain myself. I leave the room as I entered it, calm, intact, unburdened. God has said everything that needed saying. News travels quickly when truth is finally free. Whispers turn into acknowledgments. A name once stained is spoken carefully again, then confidently. Public restoration begins. Not forced, not demanded, but undeniable. They approach me differently now. Shoulders lowered. Eyes uncertain. When they bow, emotionally, socially, relationally, they do not know how to apologize. Words fail them the way silence once failed me. I accept none of it with pride. This victory is not about humiliation. It is about balance restored. God turns the table without theatrics, proving that time is the loudest witness of integrity. My name is restored publicly, but my peace was restored long before, and that makes all the difference. I help where I can, wisely, selectively, without surrendering myself again. Compassion does not require proximity to harm. Forgiveness does not demand access. I set boundaries with clarity and peace. I no longer confuse love with endurance of abuse. I do not return to places God delivered me from simply because familiarity feels holy. My yes is intentional. My no is calm. Both are acts of obedience. Victory deepens, not in reconciliation, but in freedom. I once prayed for restoration believing it meant return. Return to the house, the name, the place I lost. I imagined God rewinding time, handing back what was taken as proof that none of it had been wasted. But God does not work backward. He works deeper. What He restored was greater. He did not return me to what broke me. He replaced it with what could sustain me. I gain peace that does not tremble when circumstances shift. Peace that stays even when answers delay. Peace that is no longer borrowed from approval or stability, but rooted in trust. Honor returned too, but not the fragile kind that depends on reputation. This honor was earned quietly, through consistency, restraint, and truth lived out when no one was watching. It did not need defense. It did not need explanation. And purpose, clear, steady, undeniable. I now know why I endured what I did. Not to be hardened by it, but refined. What once felt like loss became alignment. I am no longer distracted by what I used to want. I am anchored in what I was built for. I lack nothing, not because I possess everything I once dreamed of, but because I no longer crave what once diminished me. I do not miss environments that required self-betrayal to survive. I do not mourn roles that demanded silence in exchange for belonging. God restored me beyond replacement. He gave me discernment, peace, and direction, treasures no one can steal. And I understand now. What God restores is not always visible, but it is always sufficient. If you are watching this and your deepest betrayal came from family, hear me clearly. God sees you. When blood turned against you, when the ones you fed, supported, and protected became the ones who wounded you, God did not look away. He did not misjudge your silence. He did not mistake your endurance for weakness. You are not forgotten. You are not foolish for loving deeply, and you are not abandoned. God defends those betrayed by the very hands they lifted. He does not always rush, but He is never late. Time and truth work together when God is involved. What you cannot explain, He exposes. What you cannot correct, He clarifies. You do not need revenge. Revenge only keeps you tied to the pain. What you need is endurance, the strength to keep choosing integrity when bitterness feels justified. Endurance is how God positions you for vindication without contamination. Your story is not ending where it hurt. It is ending where it heals. And if this story touched something in you, if it echoed your own silent battles, then don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Because somewhere, someone is wondering if God still stands with those betrayed by family. Tell them this. He does. And He always has.